We'll still be there in 3 months' time. Now you're going to censor that off.
That's right. It's not yet live.
He's not got. Biden's still not got 270. You know that.
It is live. It is live.
No, the media call it. The media don't decide. People decide. Look at real clear politics.
Right.
Anyway, the real deal.
Some pictures.
Yes. Oh, yes. Lots of pictures.
We've got time. We've got another 4 minutes.
No, don't.
Start 5-2. Yes, we do start 5-2. Oh, thanks, Ben. There's quite a few pictures. They're quite vital this time.
Right.
If you don't mind to do.
Well, 1 second. Why is Shiur not here?
Shiur, why not here, Shiur? Moishi wants a letter signed by your parents.
No, I want to know firstly.
Moishi, I see you far too much in the morning and the night. I decided to have a break for you. I'll be there later. Don't worry.
Chas v'shalom.
What time are you coming?
Anyway, put up the pictures, please. Tov Kuf Nun onwards. The whole loads of them. Nun, Nun Aleph, Nun Beis, Nun Gimel, Nun Dalet, Nun Hey, Nun Vov, Nun Zayin, Nun Ches, Nun Tes, Samach, Samach Aleph, Samach Beis.
My phone memory will disappear.
Wait a second. That's enough. Our next one won't get to do today, unfortunately. We only get to do 10
Tell
today.
Tolly we're missing him.
Tully, we're missing you.
Thank you, missing you too. Sorry, Ben, I didn't do it specially tonight.
Well,
It's okay.
if you don't mind, I really appreciate hanging up there, putting the pictures on. Right. Okay, let's get cracking. Right, we need to get into it. No, it's not a new sugya. Middle of a sugya. It's just want to summarize what we discussed yesterday because it's very, very important to have it clear on the things. Actually, Ben, if you don't mind to put up the picture from even from yesterday, to repost it. It's picture Tovkuf Mem Dalet. Tovkuf Mem Dalet, right yesterday. Have you got it? We're going to discuss it for a minute. Just very, very briefly. I want to get going. Let's go like this. In that picture, you have 2 chatzeros, one big, one small. Halachically, is the big one allowed to carry in his chatzah?
Yes.
Good. The small one not. And the Gemara came to a conclusion based on that. What was the Gemara's conclusion, which is a nafkimina to so many different topics? The small one is secondary to the big one. It's like a porch or a hallway to your dining room. It's considered I've never got the right word for it, but secondary is probably the closest. It's a secondary room to the main room.
It's services.
It's services. Okay. The Gemara there said lots of nafkiminas. One of the nafkiminas came out, an interesting nafkimina, that if you plant vines in the big one,
Putting up a wall makes it work. No?
always say if you plant vines in the big one, you're not allowed to plant vegetables anywhere in the small one. And Abaya was very disturbed by it because Abaya said, I don't understand. If there'd be no wall whatsoever, what distance would you have to have? 4 amas, very good. Write down on your fridge. 4 amas. Between your vines and your vegetables, you have to have 4 amas. And now that you've made walls around the two, can you plant anywhere within the small one? No. So Abaya, that doesn't make any sense. So what we did yesterday was we tried to prove to Abaya, yes, it does, that sometimes building walls makes things worse. And every time Abaya pushed away the proof. And we're continuing with this give and take. Is it possible that building walls makes things worse? So we're up to Daf Tzadik Beis Amud Aleph. Sorry, not Tzadik Beis. Tzadik Gimel Amud Aleph. 4 lines from the top. And he's continuing with the argument. What's he trying to argue now? What's he trying to say? What's the argument going to be? Right, very good. How can a war make things worse? Have you never found wars making things worse? Imagine you've got a house, half it's got a roof, half it's got no roof. Then what's the halacha? If you've got vines underneath the roof, you're allowed to plant another half. Imagine you've got a house which only got half a roof on. Like this room, it's only got a roof halfway. The other half doesn't. I was going to have a picture of it.
Yeah.
Oh.
Which one?
Yeah.
A roof going halfway.
You got a picture? I haven't got a picture of it.
Yeah. Oh, I see.
So you're allowed to plant vines in one half and vegetables in the next. Why? What's the svar? Very good. What's it called in Lashon HaKodesh? No. Pi tikva yered v'seisem. Pi tikva yered v'seisem. By the time we finish the spec, we'll have Pi tikva yered v'seisem. Says the Gemara, you're allowed to plant vines one off and one off. Now, what happens if you close off the entire roof? What becomes now?
Don't actually build a wall.
Yeah, close off the roof.
Build the roof that way.
No, build the
So
roof.
there's one area.
And then, no, we're talking about planting vines, climb. You will not be allowed to plant anywhere because it's one room. You'd have to.
That's incredible.
So you see over here.
Imagine there's a wall there and you say, the wall's two different rooms.
But if you finish off the ceiling, you can't plant anywhere because it's one wall, one room.
You can plant one of the.
One. You can only plant vines or vegetables. You can't do both. So what do we see? Building a wall makes things worse.
It's not even building a wall. It's
Building a
imagining
ceiling.
there's a wall.
No.
No.
No, again,
Not a ceiling.
when you had only half a ceiling, you can plant vines in one, vegetables in another. Now that you've finished off the ceiling, you can't plant both. You can only plant one. So you see that finishing off the ceiling makes things worse. So why you are so upset with us for telling you that you can't plant when you've got walls around? And you said, how can building a wall makes things worse? Yes, it does make things worse. So he said to him, if you finish off the ceiling, also, that's a different reason. By finishing off the ceiling, you're destroying your mechitzas, and you can't compare it. That's the Gemara says. So it's like this. We're going to have now a sugya, which we've actually once had before. We'll discuss it a little bit outside and inside. If you look at the photos that Ben Bay kindly uploaded, if you look at picture Tovkuf Nun and Tovkuf Nun Aleph, we actually had it before. The green plants is vines. The yellow is wheat. They got wheat. Actually, they've actually got green growing on brown. I'm talking about the yellow without any trees on it. So one case is talking about a vine where in the middle of the vine, many of the plants stopped growing. It's called Kareches HaKerem, a vine which has become bald. Bald, like a person became bald. And then you've got the other one, Mochel HaKerem. Mochel HaKerem is a ring around the vine. What happened was the vines on the outside died off. Normally, what is the distance you need when you're planting 4 amas? In these particular cases, you need much, much more than 4 amas. You need either 16 amas or 12 amas. Why? The Gemara will describe in greater detail, but basically the idea is you need to have 4 amas space, and then you have to have a proper area to plant something to be considered a separate domain. So you have to have at least 8 amas or 12 amas to the wall. Now, if there would be no wall, let's finish off let's talk about Tovkuf Nun Aleph. If there'd be no wall around it, and you've got a vine, you would only actually need 4 amas distance. But because you've got a wall, the wall makes it worse. Because the reasoning is that 4 amas next to a wall, nobody wants to plant. Why don't you want to plant next to frogs?
Stop the roots, no?
You need a root to plow around.
Yes, Rashi says that not here. Rashi says that elsewhere. But Rashi says a different question. Let's finish off. Let's finish off the point. Let's finish off the point. What's Rashi say here? The wall will fall down. People don't plant. Right. So therefore, when you've got walls, things are worse. You need to have more space. Right. Yes.
Normally, when we say the wall is what makes it worse, not worse, is when the wall separates the small from the big. Here, you're just saying small and big together.
Yes,
and the wall
I know.
separates.
You're right. It's not the exact same case. But the point is, it's the same logic. And therefore, the Gemara again wants to say to Abai, what did Abai say? What did Abai say? That you can't be such a thing that making a wall makes things worse. He says, well, I don't understand your problem. I've got cases where having a wall makes things worse. So let's see the Gemara inside.
So why would you need 4? The brown. Why
Yes.
would you need more than 4 of it?
Right. Which case you talk about the one where it's in the middle and one on the side. Right. The reason is like this. Let's say you only have 7 amas from the vine to the wall. You're not allowed to plant anything. Even if you have 11 amas, you can't plant. Why can't you plant if you have 11 amas? Because you want that in order that it shouldn't look mixed up, you want that the field should have its own domain. Less than 4 amas is not considered its own field.
In this case, it'd be okay then. 4.
Only because there's this 12 amas distance.
Right.
There it's mutter. In this case, it's mutter. But if there'd be 11 amas between the vine and the wall, this case is okay. Yes. So let's think more a bit inside. You never found mechitz makes it the worst. Sometimes a vine can make things better. A wall can make things better. Sometimes make it worse. How to make it better? Normally you have to have 4 amas. If you've got a wall, it's the first sugya of a basa. If you've got a wall between a vine and vegetables, it's fine. So let's say, for example, I want to plant, let's say you own the garden, I know next door, and we build a nice wall between each other. They say good fences make for good neighbors. So if you've got a good fence, So what happens is I can plant my vine all the way to the fence, and you immediately after the fence can start planting your vegetables, even though there's much less than 4 amos in between. So there we see having a wall was a kula or chumrah. Kula. We give example, Ketzad came on to add ikemechitza vineyard planted until the base of the mechitza zuvea. Ikemechitza veidech, you can plant vegetables immediately afterwards. Shilu ein shom mechitza, if there would be no mechitza, machik arba amos v'zureh. V'zeh mechitza zakem lahakel. There we found a mechitza t'vekula. Ulahach beketzad. If you've got a vine which stops 11 amos before the wall, lo yovi zeh l'shom. You're not allowed to plant. Had there not been a mechitza, had there been no walls at all, I'd only have to wait 4 amos and start planting. But now that there's a wall, I have to wait 12 amos. 11 amos is no good. So why did you, Abai, get upset that a wall should make things worse? It does. Many times a wall makes things worse. Abai replied to this question with the if this is your whole question, you should have asked me a much better question. You could have asked me from a Mishnah. The Tanan, and this is the Mishnah we've been discussing, where the Mishnah explains things at greater length. A vine that became bold in the middle. The Gemara earlier told us that according to Beishamai, in order for it to be considered a field, it has to have 8 plus 8 amos. A field less than 8 amos is not a field. If it's in the middle, it has to have 16, 8 for one side and 8 for the other. Beis Hillel say a field is 4 amos. Like a ring around the vine, the Shama 16, 12. Basically, where the middle became ruined. It means if there's no 16 amos going to be Hillel, you're not allowed to plant that. You plant in the middle, and then you leave a 4 amos space. And you can plant in the middle. What's a ring around the vine? You're not allowed to plant if there's no 12 amos. If there is 12 amos, then you put the amount of area you need to work, and you plant the rest. So you see that it works only if you've got 12 amos distance. And if you had no wall, you wouldn't need it. Let's go through it again. Why need 12 amos? The same question for the 16. You want to have 4 amos distance, and you want to have 4 amos distance from the wall because nobody likes to plant within 4 amos of the wall. And for a field not to look like it's entangled with the vine, the field has to have its proper reshus. Because since it's within one enclosure, if you plant a little bit, it looks like it's part of the vine. If you've got 4 amos, consecutive 4 amos of vegetables or wheat growing, then people see it as a separate entity to the vine. So by having a wall around this vine, you've gonna made it that in order to be able to plant around, you have to have 12 amos space. While if you had no wall, you don't need 4 amos. Elohosam Lavan Yutama says Abai, you can't compare. There is the Cholabama came of the Sakera. The 4 amos next to the vine is part of the vine because that's how much you need. In those days, they would take an ox and they would take a wagon and go round the vine and pluck and pile it up into the wagon of the vine of the ox. So there you need 4 amos. The Gabe Geder give it to the Mizdar or next to the fence you don't want to plant Afkur Mafkalu. So the Beni in between, if it's got amos chashivin, it's important. It's got its chashivas. So Abai says you can't compare this case to my case. Meaning, Abai sticks to his guns that Abai says that it can't be that a fence should make things worse, and therefore in that case where we had a big garden opening up into a small garden, according to Abai, it's illogical to say that you're not allowed to plant anywhere in the small one because the small one is bottled to the big one. Abai says that doesn't make any sense. But the other 3 Amorim, they say it does, and they try to bring in many cases where we see that building walls makes things worse, and Abai somehow each time he argues that it's not comparable. The Gemara stops with this topic and continues with a very similar topic. So we've still got this question, but Abai, from our Mishnah it is clear that when you've got a small domain and a big domain, the small one is considered subservient to the big one. Now, I'd like to look at for a minute, because before the next Gemara, the next 2 pictures, it says Tov Kuf Nun Beis and Tov Kuf Nun Gimel. And we need a tiny bit of introduction. We once discussed this, and that is like this. If a person is in a desert and he needs to make himself a fence in order to be able to carry within the area, let's say you're stuck, you go on a camping holiday, and you want to be able to carry, you've not got the energy on a Friday afternoon to build yourself a 10 tefachim high wall all the way around. So you want to build a very flimsy fence. Does anybody remember what is considered strings, which is very good?
String 3 tefachim, 4
Right,
tefachim.
with 3 tefachim gap, very good. Now we're talking about a case where you did either shesi or erev, either horizontal strings or vertical strings. Now, what is the halacha when you make such a flimsy mechitza? If anybody remembers this, they deserve a bottle of Coke. Yes, I'm not providing it now. What's the halacha? What's the halacha if you make this difference? How? Oh, okay, we'll go and say what? No, no, for sukkah not kosher, guys. If it's one person, he gets up to 2 sa'ah. That means you're only allowed to make the flimsy fence up to 2 sa'ah. If you make it bigger than 2 sa'ah, which is how many amas?
70.
Very good, 5,000 square amas. If it's bigger area than that, you're not allowed to carry. That means if you make a proper wall, let's say you're stuck in the desert for Shabbos. So you make yourself a proper wall you can carry even if it's the size of Texas. As long as it's a proper wall and it's lived in, etc., it's a proper, you can. But if it's not a proper wall and you're just camping there, so you're only up to 5,000 square meters. If it's 2 people, you get 10,000 square meters. 3 people, you get however much you want because it's called a shiur, it's called a caravan, and you're allowed as much as you want. No, it does not need to be one family. It can be different families, etc. Now, if you look, the Gemara we said now, small is always subservient to the big. It's considered like the entranceway, the porchway to the big. What happens if 3 people make such a thing? And the question is, they do not live together as such, but rather each one lives, if you look at the picture, Tov Kuf Nun Beis, you've got one on the right, one in the middle, one on the left. Look at Tov Nun Gimel. Oh, Tov Kuf Nun Gimel. Look at Tov Nun Gimel. Right, Tov Kuf Nun Gimel. Look at the picture of Tov Nun Gimel for a second. Again, you've got 3 people. Now, it's a very similar shape, except that in the first one, the small chotz is in the middle, and the second one, no. What are you looking at? You're not good at.
It looks like it's the same size.
Would you not recommend them they just build a square and get out
Right.
smaller ones?
Okay, that's a very good question.
To make us confused.
I'm just saying, like,
That's what they've done
why would
before.
they make it in there? They don't have to.
The other one, the one with the plus shape.
Nobody asks a question, Ben. I'm sorry.
It appears the one with the plus shape, that the two on the outside are subservient to the one on the inside, no?
Well, you tell me. Who's
Well, we don't
subservient
know. It
to?
could be
Who's
the wall.
subservient to?
It could be the walls go like that, or the walls go
I
like
I
that.
don't know what your problems are.
It's symmetrical. If you want to mirror between all of the same either way.
Why? Have you got the same pictures I have? The middle one
If you want to mirror it
is
between-
smaller, it's narrower.
It's narrow, but it's not smaller. It's
And
just
this makes a
because it's on
difference.
the-
We talked about this the other day.
Yeah, it doesn't
It's got to do with the fact that his fences are smaller. Many times your hallway comes off your dining room, and the hallway can be bigger, but it's a
You're
smaller.
stood
I
here.
understand that.
Yeah. Where we
You
should
can't see the wall going out.
Oh, he's standing in the middle.
He's hanging here.
Oh, if
Yeah,
you,
you're right. The picture should have him
Why? I
standing
don't
there.
understand what your problems are. Again,
Where's the guy standing?
there's 3 different people. Each
Yeah,
one
it's
built
fine.
themselves a flimsy fence around an area. Now, the question is like this. If we consider them all 3 living together, so then it doesn't matter however big it is, it will be okay, because we said a flimsy fence, once you've got 3 people, however big it is, it's okay. But if they're not living together, they're only entitled to how much? Does anybody know?
2 stars.
2 saw per
2 saw
person,
times
so it'll be times 3, because it's actually 3 people, it'll be 6 saw.
Which
So
is you.
6 saw, 50 hours, 70 by 70, you'd be allowed.
210 by 210.
No, 210 by 70, because 3 times
Yeah.
210 by 70. It's not so big, 210 hours, 140 meters by 30 meters for your whole Shabbos, and you can be stuck there for, right, again. Let's get it clear. The question is, what would you say? Would you say that people on the bigger one are drawn after the smaller one, the smaller one drawn after the bigger one? Why would you say that? Very good. That's what we talk about all the time. That when you've got a small room coming off a big room, like we had in that chotzer and yesterday about the tzoya and the chazan, we always look at the smaller room as being a hallway and drawn into the big one. So therefore, let's see the Gemara inside now. We're up to Omar Yehuda.
Not false, it says auxiliary.
Auxiliary.
That's
Oh,
the word- that's
there
the
we
word
go.
they use.
auxiliary. Yes, it's good to shove it.
Get your dictionary out.
Says the Gemara.
That's great.
Omar Yehuda, we're about 10 lines from the bottom. Omar Yehuda. Sholish kalfifois ze b'tzad ze. You have 3 kalfifois, 3 enclosures, one after the next. You've got 3 enclosures. V'shnayim achitzonim, the 2 outer ones, megufofim. The two outer ones are fenced in because they're bigger. Since they are bigger, they have an extra enclosure. The bigger one always has an extra enclosure. And the middle one does not have this extra fence. It's narrow. There's one in every single one of those three enclosures. Then, therefore, they consider that however big it is, it doesn't matter, because they're all drawn into the middle, and therefore you can do as big as it is. But if the middle one is bigger, you can only give them 6, because what happens is, we look, the bigger one in the middle, and I stick about the second story. So he's drawn, he's got the one on the outer is part of his, and the other one is also part of his. But there's no 3 people living together. Mashenkin, in the other case, the 3 people, when you've got the enclosure, the smaller one in the middle, let's say, for example, I have a room, and you have a room, and Chaim has a room. And in the middle, there's a hallway. So in the hallway, we're all considered to be living together, because the hallway is the... But let's say, for argument's sake, we all have a hallway. But, sorry, we have 3 hallways and only 1 dining room. Then you won't say that we share it together, because the hallway is drawn after the dining room. So that's what the
Like
Gemara said.
dorms in a Shiur, for example.
That's right.
We've all got the dining room together.
That-
but we
oh.
live elsewhere.
Yes. Communal room.
Common room.
Common room. So the middle one becomes the common room. Says the Gemara, in this last case, if there's 2 in the middle, if he goes out to the mid, to the outer one, there'll be 3. Either way, there'll be 3, because whichever direction he goes out, there'll always be 3. Oh. Maybe one will go out to the right, one will go to the left. You haven't got 3 anyway. So what happens if you've got 2 on the outside and 1 in the middle now? Do we say now you've definitely got a combination of 3? Whichever way the middle one goes to, whichever one he joins, Lemaisa there'll be 3. We don't know which one he'll join. We have no idea. Because that we pass him Nakula. I just think to an interesting idea from a Rashash, a very Yisudistic idea from a Rashash. If you were to ask, if I was to say to you, the Gemara wouldn't have told us the halacha is the kula, what would you have pasken without the Gemara saying anything? Very good. You say because of Eiruvin, you can say because it's to Rabbanon. The Ma'is the Achronim asked like Ben. The Gemara could have stopped and said nothing, and I would have known the kula, suffered to Rabbanon the kula, and they all get very disturbed about it. What's going on over here? Why did the Gemara need to finish off the halacha is the kula? Of course, it's the kula. Suffered to Rabbanon. Oh, if the Gemara doesn't know, when we say you don't know. For example, I don't know what to do. I need to phone up the Rav. I can't say suffer job on the Kulam. But here, if the Gemara doesn't know, right? So he says eventually, he said very important to remember this. The Rambam paskins that whenever the Gemara says imtim salema, if you will say this tzad, the Gemara says I'll ask you maybe this, maybe that. And if you say that, let's say, I'm not sure if A or B. And if you say B, I've got another shaila regarding that question. Whenever the Gemara says Imtim Salima, we pass connect Imtim Salima. Because the Gemara had a netia to that. In this previous Gemara, the Gemara said Imtim Salima, that L'chumma, that one goes to the right. You've got 2 in the middle, we're machmid, that maybe one will go to the right, one will go to the left, and you only have 2 on each side, you won't have 3 anywhere. So therefore, the Gemara had to tell us, nevertheless, even though I've told you to Salima L'chumma, you should know the halacha is the kula. The reason I mentioned this is Shash, because it's important to know this halacha of the Rambam. Whenever we say Imtim Salima, that's how we pass. Now we're starting a new topic. And I'd like once again to look at the pictures which we put up before. We're up to picture Tovkuf Nun Dalet. Not brilliant picture, it's a bit of a picture. In Tovkuf Nun Dalet, if you look carefully, the brown is simply the idea that there's a garden is higher than another garden. Now let's say that my garden is 10 tefachim higher than your garden. Can we make an Eruv together, yes or no?
No.
There's no fence. Just my garden is 10 tefachim higher than yours.
Your gardens?
10 tefachim higher
No
than
fence.
yours. And there's no
So,
fence.
yes. So I've got a problem,
No.
you haven't.
No.
Neither of us can make an Eruv. together. How can you make?
Together, yeah.
Because at the end of the day, you're allowed to make an Eruv, you're right. Each one separately. You can't make an Eruv together. Why? Two chatzers. My back garden goes to your back garden, no fence, but there's a 10 tefachim drop. We can't make an Eruv together. If there's a 10 tefachim fence, we also can't make an Eruv together. What would the din be if it's a 5 tefachim fence and 5 tefachim drop?
Well, then you've got one person has a
That's different.
problem,
It's
the
a
other
wall.
person doesn't.
It's not a 10.
The one
It's not a 10 to fucking
No,
more.
it is. It still goes down.
It's still 10
So that is the picture in Tofel from the Dalit, if you look very carefully. You've got one garden, 5 tefachim of soil, and then 5 tefachim of
Either
wall.
way, you can't get over it. There's 10 in the whole.
There's
There's
10
10 to fucking.
I tell you, it's interesting. It's a machlokas in the Gemara.
The guy with 5 fucking carry on.
We paskin that it is a fence. It's actually quite common, this shayla. It's 10. No, it's a chitz of 10. So because I've got it in my back garden when my back is Winchester is about 5 tefachim higher than mine. We actually have a proper fence anyway. But if there'd only be a 5 tefachim fence, and it's fascinating shaylas, I'll tell you interesting shayla by halacha klez as follows. When we talk about a mound, tell mislakit, a mound is also considered a fence. Do you remember we talked about coming out of a river? What's the ratio?
4 and 10 or 10 and 4.
Very good. 10 tefachim in 4 amos.
Yeah.
Now we said over here that if you've got 5 tefachim of a mound plus 5 tefachim of a wall, we paskin it is a wall. Says Mishnah Bur, 5 tefachim, how much? What would you say logically?
Oh,
Which is
5 and 2.
5 tefachim 2 amos. That's what Mishnah Bur says. Says the Chazlish, I don't agree. Why don't I agree? Anybody guesses this? I never thought why the Chazlish
because
was.
you would say that because if it would go like that.
Say it again?
If you have this, I'll verb to myself. I kicked myself afterwards.
What's that?
Let's just get this question clear.
No, see, it's about,
Yeah, you
you
got.
make a wall from the floor to the
Right.
top, and if you've got a garden on the other side,
That's right. You got.
there's not in that lit. There's not enough of a. It's not the same.
You say it is a bechitza. Let's catch this again. If you get this video, we pass this. We pass this. Okay. If imagine if I've got 5 tefachim gap between my garden and your garden, let's say your garden goes down 5. Plus I've got a fence of 5 tefachim, that's considered a proper fence. Now, as you point out, Moshe, very well, that whenever we talk about a mound, it has to be 10 in 4, 10 tefachim in 4 amos, which is 24% if you're interested. 24%. Remember we discussed this about because the Gemara talks about a path gradient, 24% gradient, which is quite steep. If you got 24% gradient between my garden and your garden, that's considered separate gardens. It's like says the Mishnah Bur, if it's only 5 tefachim mound and 5 tefachim wall, it has to be 5 in 2 amos. That's what Mishnah Bur says. Why not? Because in order for it to be a mound, it has to be that way. So the Chazon Ish, no, because since 5 of it is straight up as a fence, so if it's 5 in 4 plus another 5 as a fence, that is 10 in 4, and therefore it should also be considered. I thought you'd have it.
That's 10 and 2. We said 5 and 2.
Mishnah Bur says you have to have 5 in 2.
Right.
So the other bit can be less steep.
That's right. That's what Chazon Ish says.
Like to here.
Even if it's 5 and 4, which is not steep, it's only 12% gradient. Since at the other end, the total of it, 5 mound plus 5 fence will be 10.
More, it has to be, you go further back.
The Chazon is being made cool.
Less. Oh, less.
It's been made cool. Okay, but then my say it's a machloikas. We're jumping because my say what means machloikas. First of all, means the shit that it's not a fence. Right. What did you say? So I didn't catch what you said.
No, sorry, that sounds like a first. I'm not usually.
Says the Gemara like this. Abu Av Chista, top of Tzaddik Gimel on base. This is a cheshbek more. Gidud Chamisha. If you've got a mound of 5, umechitza Chamisha, and a fence of 5, ein mitzdarfin. It's not a fence. Not like I just told you we pass them. We don't pass the necklace of Chista, but this is what Chista says. It's not a wall. Add you got to choose. Either you have a wall of 10 or a mound of 10. You can't join the two together, right? So if you've got a small hill and then a little fence, that will not be a mechitza. Meisli, you got 2 gardens, 2 chatzeros, 1 courtyards, 1 above the other. The top one is 10 tefachim higher than the bottom one. Or alternatively, it's got a 5 tefachim mound and a 5 tefachim fence. You can only do an Eruv separate, not together. You can't do an Eruv together. Why can't you do an Eruv together? No, you can't. Only you can only do an Eruv separately, not together, because you've got either a 10 tefachim fence or 5 tefachim mounds is separate. Pochus mikan, if it's less than that, then you can do an Eruv together but not separate. So clearly this brisa at the face of it says the exact opposite of Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda came along and spoke to the base of Medrash. What did he tell us? If you've got a mound 5 plus a wall 5, says Rav Chisda, it's not a wall. Says the brisa, it is a wall. So you couldn't get a more clear brisa which seems to contradict. And I think what works very hard to explain how the brisa works according to Rav Chisda. Omar Rava, Moed Rav Chisda betachtoina, hoyel v'voyer p'nei asar. Says, let's look at the picture very carefully if you don't mind. Imagine the schar you'll get. You can't imagine the schar we'll get for learning this kind of Gemara. You can't imagine the reward. Without the sweets. Look at the picture, Tovkuf Nun Dalet. Yeah, I've got a friend who deals in diamonds. So I said to him, if you ever get a nice diamond, show it to me. Right? He deals wholesales. So yesterday he came up to me with a diamond, smaller than the postage stamp. So guess how much it's worth? It's got loads of flaws inside it. Yes, much less. He said it's £21,000 what he's selling. He sells wholesale. He said you go to a high street shop, it costs you 50,000 easily. Now it's a tiny little thing. Now see, this is how you're supposed to see every word of Rashi. Come on. It's tiny, but we can't imagine it's worth millions upon millions. A tiny little thing. You can't imagine. So look at this picture again. Tovkuf Nun Dalet. Says the Gemara of Chisda retracts half. What does it retract half? We said before in Tovkuf Nun Dalet, look at the picture very carefully, that if you've got a mound which is 5 tvachim, the wall which is 5 tvachim, said of Chisda that's not a fence. Why? Choose either the whole thing a fence or the whole thing a mound. Now Rava says of Chisda retracted, meaning that it is true that it is a wall for the lower one, because when they look, what can they see? A 10 tvachim wall. But for the upper one, it's not a mechitza, because when they're looking out in their garden, what height can they see? They only see 5. Now let's examine the brisa with this of Chisda's heart. Before we said according to Chisda, it's not a wall for either. And I just want to remind you, halacha lemaisa, it's a mechitza for both, by the way. Now, even for the one who sees 5, it's a mechitza. But that's not how Chisda says. If Chisda said it's not a mechitza for the up, it's only a mechitza for the bottom. Now let's look at the brisa again and see if it fits it. The bottom one is allowed to make an Eruv of 2. Can't make an Eruv with the upper one. Why can't the bottom one make an Eruv with the top one? Because you can see a 10 tvachim fence in front of it. The top one can't do an Eruv not together, not separately. Why can't it do an Eruv not together, not separately? This is a complicated question. It can't do separately. Why can't it do an Eruv separately? The top one. Think about the top one. What wall can it see? 5. Can it do an Eruv separately? Nope. Because a 5 tvachim fence is not a real fence. Let me just finish off. So let them do an Eruv together. Why can't it do an Eruv together? Because the bottom one can't join with him because he's got a 10 tvachim gap.
Normally, if you've got 5 tvachim in your garden,
yes,
it's a nothing, right?
That's right.
So he's got all the way to the end, a nothing, and then
Right.
a 10
5 tvachim drop.
No, he's got this fence. That's
It's 5 tvachim.
right?
And it's
That
5
doesn't-
tvachim mount, 5 tvachim fence.
Yeah, but the guy on top,
Yes.
right, he's got 5 tvachim mount.
Right.
That's 5 tvachim
Fence.
Right? He comes to that. That's
Nothing.
just ignore it. Then
Right.
it's not a drop. So that should be a wall for him.
No, it's
The
not
drop down
because
is a
No,
wall.
because together it's a
because he'll say the 5 tvachim fence is nothing, and then there's only a 5 tvachim drop from the fence.
Yeah, but from the guy on top, he comes to the end. He's got nothing there, and then.
You argue with the
If the guy
Chisda.
on the bottom
I'm
put a
just saying
ladder
from the
up,
start.
then
Right.
make it out.
Yes, the guy at the bottom makes.
Yeah, because then.
Then it would work. So now the Gemara says this: the bottom one should be able to make an Eruv by itself because it's got a wall by itself. So the bottom one should be able to make an Eruv by itself. The top one can't make an Eruv not together and not by himself. He can't make it together because the bottom one can't join him because it's 10 tvachim fence. He can't make it separate because he's only got 5 tvachim fence. Says the Gemara, and that's not what the Bible says. The Gemara changes the whole Brisa a little bit. And the Brisa, look at picture Tov Kuf Nun Vav. You have to look at it very carefully. We're talking about a 15 tvachim fence. The first 5 tvachim is just the gap of one chotz alone another. After that 5 tvachim, there's a 5 tvachim of proper wall. After that, there's 5 tvachim of which is only on the barriers on the side, but there's an entranceway in the middle. So you've got 5 tvachim, one chotz is lower than the next. 5 tvachim of proper solid wall, 5 tefachim of wall with an entrance in the middle. If you look at it very carefully,
Gap.
There's a gap
there's a gap in the last 5 tefachim. That means if you look, it's 5 tefachim
in the middle.
soil.
There. It's 5 tefachim of a wall.
That's-
It doesn't go up to 10 tefachim.
But this- There's an entrance way. You look carefully. Like an entrance way. It is an entrance way. Why is that not an entrance way? It's 5 tefachim. He said it's political. It's nothing. So therefore, it's considered on the side you've got 10 tefachim. In the middle you got 5. Now let's no, because it's got an entrance. Now let's see what should our halacha be. So let's go briefly. The bottom one can't do an Eruv with the top one. Why not? 10 tefachim. The top one can do an Eruv by himself. Can he do an Eruv by himself?
Yeah.
Yes, because he's got 10 tefachim on the side. And the fact that he's got an entrance, we once said before, an entrance is the best of both worlds. You can make an Eruv together or separately. So since it's like an entrance, we accept it.
And they both can't make it together.
So you can't make it together, each one's separate. Then we're Yochim and Sefer, let's examine a continuation of advice. Pochus we can. That means you've got 5, the difference in the height of the chutzah, 5 of solid wall, and then 4 on the sides. Meaning you've only got 9 tefachim on the sides and 4, which is the height of the entrance. If that's the case, ma'avin echad ein ma'avin shnai. You can only do an Eruv together. I don't understand. Let them do an Eruv together, because at the end of the day, he's got an Eruv. Why can't he make an Eruv separately? Because at the end of the day, he's got a fence of 10 on the sides. On the sides, he's got an Eruv fence of 10 from the bottom
14,
one.
yeah.
It's 14. That means you have to change a tiny bit. Tofkuf nun zayin, where the bottom one, not only, if you look very carefully, done it in detail, on the side you've got 10 tefachim. In the middle, you've got an entrance way of 4 tefachim. And then besides that, it's 5 tefachim of a height. And the middle, the smaller one, is open completely to the bigger one. So now they're both stuck.
That should be like the case.
It's a bit like the case before. So let's work it
Why
out.
are they both stuck?
Why are they both stuck? Let's explain. They're both stuck. Why are they both stuck? Like this. Let's explain. What's the halacha? Let's do this. What's the halacha? The halacha is like this. That the bottom one can't make an Eruv by itself. Why can't it make an Eruv by itself? He's only got 9 tefachim. He's only got 9 tefachim. Because over to the next one. And the top one can't make an Eruv by itself. Why? Because he's only got 4 tefachim. Because in the middle he's only got 4 tefachim.
Even though they're around the more than all
Oh,
day.
that's the one asks now. Yochi, if so, tachtoin at the bottom. What?
I think the same as a question before the top down. What's changed from the case
No,
before?
before Tis actually asks about that this
The case
cash the
before
world.
was also Shayach.
No, we've
It's
gained that the bottom one can't do an Eruv by itself.
only the bottom that can't make one.
That's right.
So
That's what we've
why-
gained.
why should
Before-
the top one?
Oh, that's the one. That's exactly what I asked now. Yochi tachtoino chata. They can make an Eruv together. Trey loy to we can't make an Eruv separately because they've got 9. And loy boy trey to if he wants to make an Eruv separately, he can because it's got what's called gifufim, the barriers to the side. Iboy chata, we can make an Eruv together. When the Brisa says they have to make an Eruv together, it's only referring to the lower one, not the top one. So let's summarize like this. Rav Chisda came along and told us that when you've got a wall which is combined of 2 separate things, a mound plus a fence, it doesn't work. We asked the kasha from a Brisa, we retracted that it doesn't work for the top one, but it does work for the bottom. The Gemara still asks, because the Brisa still seems to be saying that the top one, it works for him as well. So the Gemara gives us a complicated situation where you've got a wall as follows. On the sides, it's a wall, and therefore the top one is separate because it's got what's called gifufim. Gifufim is like barriers. In the middle, he's got an entranceway. The bottom one can't make an Eruv by himself because it's completely open to the top one. The top one can make, and when the Brisa says that they can't do an Eruv, they have to do an Eruv together, it's referring only to the bottom one, not to the top one. Let's think more about it a little bit. They do work together. Do you know anything about Hilchas Mechitza? I don't know anything except for the Hilchas Gidud Chavisha Mechitza Chavisha Mitztaf. That's a million mitzvahs. The only halacha I know that it does work together. 5 fence, 5 mound does work. And when you come to that, then the whole brisa fits in much, much better. Let's go back to the brisa on the top, which starts off the 3rd line of this page. Now that we said, because once you've got this 5 and 5, it's 2 separate issues. Because we're talking about a normal case where you've only got 4 in the mound, 4 in the fence, and then you can only do an Erev together. Right. I want to go to the next Gemara because it's Kedai. Okay, I thought it would take a full running out of time, so rush that. But okay, I'll get to it. Go a second. What happens if a wall fell down on Shabbos? For example, me and Ben live. What? Very good. The Gemara answers like you. We had this Gemara before in different versions. The Gemara passes like you. But let's just get it clear first. Let's get the story clear. I made an Eiruvin in my back garden, so I can carry from my house to my back garden. Ben made from his house to his back garden. Right? And there's a proper wall between us. Good fences, as we said, is a very important thing. Then, in the middle of Shabbos, the fence falls in. Now we're open up to each other completely. So it's like he's moved into my garden. So it's like now, what? Yes. Oh. So now what do I do? Am I allowed to still carry from my house into the garden? So he said, the Mishnah says that if it fell the wall on Shabbos, the Gemara haven't understood, we talk about where it fell down on Shabbos. The halacha is the big one's mutter, the small one's also, because the small one is considered to be the entrance of the big one. So you see that it becomes also even on Shabbos. Perhaps so we talk about when the wall fell down before Shabbos. Meaning, if the wall between me and Ben fell down before Shabbos, then there's no chiddush. Because then before Shabbos came in, and that Mishnah was not talking about where it fell down on Shabbos, it was talking about before Shabbos. Don't say perhaps. It definitely happened before Shabbos. No, don't say to me perhaps, but rather I'm sure of it. Why? It says, I asked Rav Huna, and he asked Rav Yehuda, that's the question we discussed earlier. Let's say Shabbos, me and Ben want to make an Eruv, and we have a doorway, or we have a window. And what happened was the doorway became blocked, or the window became blocked. So now we have no access together. And this happened on Shabbos. What's the din? Shabbos, kiven shehutra, hutra. It becomes mutter. And nice, that's how we pass them. That it all swings according to what happened when Shabbos came in. So if when Shabbos comes in, we had a wall, so it's considered separate to Shiur. If when Shabbos came in, we had an entranceway, it's good enough. If in the middle of Shabbos something went wrong, it doesn't matter.
So we're still carrying our gardens.
We can still carry in our gardens. Let's carry it a bit. It's a wall between two chaseres that fell. Rav doesn't agree with this previous command. Rav holds that we don't say kivin shehutra.
It fell before Shabbos.
No, it fell on Shabbos. It fell on Shabbos. Fell on Shabbos. Rashi, look at the words of Rashi. Rav lesle hol v'hutra. So therefore, since the wall fell in, so therefore we never made a nail. So let's say, for example, according to Rav, the wall which me and Ben falls in on Shabbos, I can no longer carry in my garden except up to 4 amos, and that's it.
You get 4 amos from your house.
No. If it's in the garden, I can carry less than 4
You
amos.
can't carry from your house.
I can't carry from the house to garden. You know what? I'm going to get to the Mishnah because it's the end of the topic. What?
So you go to what was it?
That's right. Shabbos came in. We learned it from a story. The Rav Shmuel Avi Yossi Baruchot said we're sitting together in the garden. Nofal good at the Beni, and the wall fell down. Shmuel held. What does Shmuel hold if a wall falls down on Shabbos? You can carry. Shkulu Glima Negidubo. You can take a coat and hang it over. We'll see later the reason he wanted the coat was simply he wanted privacy, not because of halachic reasons. But you can see it didn't matter carrying because he said take a coat and put it where the fence used to be. He's not worried about carrying. I didn't Rav Lape. Rav turned away. He was very annoyed. When you get annoyed with something, you look away. Amalu Shmuli copied Abba. Abba is a term of respect. Some say that was his real name, Rav. If Rav is upset, Shkulu Hemnei, take his belt off. V'katupol. Can you imagine such a shtech? Rav didn't approve of it. So he said that you need to, when you want to take a coat and hang it as a fence, you need something to keep it there. Take Rav's belt off him and use the belt to hang the coat. Because Shmuel wanted to establish the halacha like himself, that what? So use his belt. Why did he bother with the coat? You're allowed to carry to the wall and there's no problem. So the Gemara says Shmuel Ovad Tznius B'Yama. He did it only as tznius. If Rav felt it's forbidden, why do you have to turn his face? Why didn't you just stand up and shout? And it says, well, as to the Shmuel have, it was the town of Shmuel. He didn't want to disrespect Shmuel in his town. Why did he turn his face around? And says the Lemu he didn't want people to think that he has changed his mind. So he didn't want to protest. But Bel Wine once told me this story. It's an unbelievable story. That he was a Rav in Miami, a young man, and the Satmar Rebbe B'Yomi Satmar, who was anti-Tzionia. Bel Wine, I have many conversations with Bel Wine. Fast, used to come and visit him because it was his town. And when you go to a town, you have to visit the town shtot. And he had all the Hasidim coming in, and he had many stories as covered for the town. So Rav was in Shmuel's town. And I tell you very briefly that once Bel Wine decided to open up a yeshiva where they taught Limudei Chayim. As you can imagine, what the Satmar Rebbe would think of such a thing. And what happened was, so when the Rebbe was there, he said to me, Bel Wine himself is very tziyoni. And the Satmar Rebbe was the most, he told me that you could see Kedusha on the Satmar Rebbe's face. He never went to bed, and he never was good to imagine, he never ever used to go to bed. He used to sit there and just talk to Torah, and when he would fall asleep, would fall asleep. So one time, Bel Wine said that the Rebbe came into him, and he said to him, he used to come every winter because it was very cold. He used to come, Miami's milder climate. And once went to visit him, so I said to him, I'm opening up a yeshiva with the Limudei Kodesh and the Limudei Chayim, because otherwise the boys won't come to yeshiva. What does the Rebbe think? So he said to me, I'll tell you, there was a Yid. I'll tell you a story. So they always used to answer with a story. He has many stories. Anyway, the Yid once went to a restaurant and he got served a bowl of soup, very tasty, full of flies. So he said to the waiter, next time, please serve me the flies in one bowl and the soup in another bowl. That was all he would say about the yeshiva. But he told me that once he opened up a mikveh, and the Rebbe sent a message, when does your mikveh open? I want to tevel in it. So there's the lack of mikvehs. He said, if I tevel in it, that will be your best hechsher temple. And I want people to be machabed you. Isn't that a beautiful story? It's unbelievable. And this was somebody that was a young man. Bel Wine was a young man. And it's unbelievable.
They
That
say the Satmar Rebbe was a massive annoying, but not on anyone's cheshbon.
not on anyone's cheshbon. Unbelievable stories. Had a lot of these stories. Anyway. So you see that Shmuel was his town, so Rav didn't agree, so he didn't say anything. They turned his face away because he didn't agree. So the mice we paskin, hol v'hutra hutra. So if you see a fence falling down in between your two mechitzas, you're okay. Oh, what about the Eiruvin? The Eiruvin is the problem is they might have fallen in before Shabbos, you only notice on Shabbos, okay.